Plimoth Plantation is a living museum of 17th century Plymouth colony and the Wampanoag homeland. We're visited by close to 400,000 people a year, and we have a number of major sites. In 2013, we're celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Wampanoag Indigenous program, which is one of the country's oldest Native American programs, and we are incredibly proud of the advances in research and the recovery of historic technologies that the program has made in 4 decades, and how they're feeding the communities of Native people on Martha's Vineyard and on Cape Cod and along the southeastern coastline. It's just a vivid, lively program that not only teaches history, it preserves and transfers culture.
We as Native people preserving our artistry is an expression of one aspect of our culture that it can be relayed over time. It gives you a sense of identity, a foundation for you, who you are as a human being on this planet.
We've been in this part of southern New England since around the Ice Age. When we first came here, what is now the islands was all part of the mainland, and our people actually lived further east in what is now the ocean. This part of the ocean, the North Atlantic, is very rich, for food, and it's what drew our people here, and it is what keeps us here.
By the time of the arrival of the European in early 1600s, the Wampanoag Nation was about 69 tribes. And we moved about. We moved about, but in an area, a large area, Massachusetts, part of Rhode Island, the islands. During the 17th century, our way of travel was mostly on foot and also on waterways.
Our principal watercraft are canoes or mishoons, and there's different styles of mishoons. Depending on, there were so-called war canoes, which were 40, 50 feet long and could hold 20 men, right down to a small personal size one that could hold a person, for a local close to shore in the bay fisheries.
And the boat itself was the most common style you would have seen around the Americas, not just North America, not Central South America, but all over, You had the birch bark boat, you had the skin boats, you have your reed boats, you have your kayaks, but the dugout itself would have been the most common.
It provided not only trade, it provided networking, nation building, treaty making, marriage, intermarriage between different Native groups. So it was their major form of transportation.
Well, I imagine being put back in nature, back in a real traditional setting, without any outside influences, before contact with the rest of the world. I think my ancestors were probably having a lot in their minds walking around southeastern Massachusetts and trying to think about what kind of tree would fit their needs and what they needed for a house, what they needed for a boat, what they needed for tools and tool handles out of the wood that they got from that tree. So I imagine back then probably using a good quality tree that was nice and straight, of course, for having a nice straight log. So I imagine my ancestors probably scouring around the area. If they were building a home, they would probably try to find a tree that had good quality tree bark, try to clear away some of the area so that they could have a clearing to make their home, and then probably use a lot of those tree trunks for boats for the community or for their families.
It's a man's job to do this, The men are considered to be the takers of life, while the women are considered to be the givers of life. So you go out and look for a tree, but that's life itself, We don't put ourselves above or below any form of life, being an animal, being a tree, being a plant, a human life, where we believe we're all equal.
When we do find a tree and we choose the one that's appropriate for our needs, there's ceremony. You're giving thanks and prayer. You're about to take its life, and you show appreciation for that gift.
So you look for a tree near a river, most likely, or fresh water. And by a river, you have clay, and you got clay beds, and you want to pull up those clay and bring it with you. And when you find a tree, you want to pack the clay around the trunk of the tree. You're looking at probably about 6-8 feet up the tree, and you make maybe a 2-foot barrier of clay. The reason for this is the way you take down trees is not by chopping them down, but by burning them down. So what that clay barrier is going to do is prevent that fire that you build around the trunk of the tree from spreading all the way up the tree.
And then once the tree fell, once that man or the group of guys or whoever was working on the mishoon or boat would get the desired length of their tree and say, okay, this is where I want the front of my boat to be, they would peel some of the tree bark and do a very similar burn and scrape, pack the coal where they didn't want it, almost like a measuring line. This is where I want the burning to stop, and just burn and scrape and burn and scrape. And over time, I imagine probably a handful of days, you would have cut that tree, you would have had your log that you wanted to make into your boat, and the shape of the outsides would have already been accomplished by burning and scraping to cut the wood.
Fire is considered to be the #1 woodworking tool for the man. It's not just used for making boats, but it's used for making spoons, used for making bowls, mortars for grinding corn. If you had a piece of wood and you needed to hollow it out, you burn out the inside. But traditionally, how we made these boats is by burning 24 hours a day, burning all day, all night. Back in, I think, in 1610, Roger Williams, he noticed a Narragansett man down on Rhode Island. He observed him making a chestnut boat. He said it took that man anywhere from 10 to 12 days to do. He wasn't even sure the exact time.
What I hope that a guest to the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian will learn and experience from seeing the mishoon is the incredible subtlety and mastery of technology by the Wampanoag people, and using fire as technology in a very elegant way, and understanding and having a relationship with that log that becomes the mishoon, and where to burn, where to scrape, where it needs to be thick, where it needs to be thin, and then how this mishoon moved through the water, and the work that it was able to do for Wampanoag people, and the diplomatic connections it was able to maintain between the mainland and between the islands. So the fishing, the trade, the diplomacy it enabled.
I know that there's been studies about how cultural knowledge builds the achievement level for Native people in whatever we want to do. If we have a sound understanding of our culture, even if we don't get to practice it as much, if we have a good foundation of that, then we can soar.